Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another of our Commander's Guild deck techs. This is deck number 222 and it's titled Spirit Crimes. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So today, our random card was suggested to us by Brian Holiday over on Discord, and that card is Horobi Death's Wail. And Horobi is 2 black for a 4/4 legendary creature spirit. It's got flying, and whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, destroy that creature. Now, a bit of an unspoken rule on the channel, of course, is if we have a legendary creature or some other card that could be our commander as our random card, then obviously we gotta play it as the commander. That is the most efficient way for us to get to, build around that card. So of course, we do have Horobi in the command zone today. So let's break down some of our themes for this deck and kind of talk about how this deck wants to function. First, we of course have targeting effects. Since Horobi destroys any creature that is targeted, whether it's by a spell or an ability, means we can kind of play around with cheap and efficient targeting effects that may not actually have an actual effect on the creature or on the game, but can destroy a creature very easily and very kind of out of nowhere. So a good example of this is Ich-Tekik Primal Death, which is 4 black for a 6/6 legendary creature elder dinosaur. It has Death Touch, and you can pay a black and reveal Ich-Tekik from your hand to put a prey counter on target creature. However, you can only activate this ability during your turn, but when Ich-Tekik enters the battlefield, destroy each creature your opponents control with a prey counter on it. This looks a little bit odd. It kind of looks like a board wipe that is expensive and you can kind of see it coming. But in reality, what we want to use this for is its ability to put the prey counters on target creatures. This allows us to spend a single black mana to target a creature on board. That means that if we have Horobi, that is 1 black mana to destroy any target creature. And that is incredibly powerful because this is a repeatable ability. We can activate it as many times as we want, as often as we want. The only catch is it has to be during our turn, but it's a great way to clear away the board. Moving on to our second theme, this is caring about creatures dying. So we have a lot of cards in the deck that specify that they do some sort of ability when a creature dies, because with Horobi we do intend to kind of just keep the board pretty clear. And so one of the best effects of that nature is Vein Ripper, which is 3 black for a 6/5 vampire assassin. It has flying, ward of sacrifice a creature, and whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this rewards us for whenever any creature dies, we get to gain 2 life, target opponent loses 2 life. But I will say, it is worth mentioning that with ward, while that would normally force our opponents to sacrifice a creature, if we have Horobi in play and something targets the Vein Ripper to destroy it, Horobi doesn't care about ward. Horobi will still destroy the Vein Ripper because it's not being targeted by a spell or ability that our opponents control. So the ward doesn't actually help if Horobi's on the battlefield, but just in case Horobi's not on the battlefield, then that's a pretty useful ability. Moving on to our final theme of the deck, this one is going to be crimes. We are really setting our deck up to be a very efficient committing crimes kind of deck. So we can commit a ton of crimes in one turn, we can spread them out over multiple turns, but we want to be able to benefit from cards that want us to be committing crimes. And a good example of that is Ich-Tekik the Punisher, which is 1 black for a 3/3 legendary creature human warlock. Whenever you commit a crime, exile up to 1 target black card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. If you do, you lose 2 life. It is very important with Ich-Tekik to note that this is not a specific type of card. It's not creatures, it's not instants, it's any black card. And since we're a mono black deck, that is the vast majority of our deck. So being able to cast something every single time we commit a crime means that we are able to use something like Tetsamok, for example, for 1 mana, commit a crime, and then cast some big spell out of our graveyard with the mana we have left over. Plus, of course, Karavek, not the only crime payoff in the deck, but it's definitely a very powerful one. Anyway, moving on to our key cards of the deck. So, talking about our themes gives us a broad overview. Now I want to focus in a little bit more on some key cards. So these are the MVPs, the most valuable cards in the deck, not money-wise, but gameplay-wise. So first up, we have Gisa the Hellraiser, which is 3 black for a 4/4 legendary creature human warlock. She has Ward of 2 mana and 2 life. She gives skeletons and zombies we control +1/+1 and menace. And whenever you commit a crime, create 2 tapped 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature tokens, but this ability triggers only once each turn. Now, when I first put this deck together, I assumed that the once per turn ability on Gisa was really going to be kind of a downfall that made her at best. But if we're being perfectly honest, being able to generate 4 power worth of tokens every single turn, because we can very reliably trigger a crime every single turn, that puts Gisa in one of the best token generator positions that we can get in mono black when we're just playing our game plan. We can do very normal things with our deck, do exactly what we want to do, and just flood the board with zombies, which because of Gisa are going to be 3/3s with menace. So rather than putting 4 power on board, we're actually putting 6, which I think is, obviously much better, but something that can close out games a lot faster. Moving on to our second key card. In this case, we have Cauldron of Souls. And Cauldron of Souls doesn't look like too much on the surface. It's 5 mana for an artifact, and it can tap to choose any number of target creatures. Each of those creatures gains persist until the end of turn. Being able to give things persist is nice. It means we can save our board if something tries to board wipe. That gives us the ability to save specific creatures. Maybe we really need to keep Gisa around, or we really need to keep anything else that could be relevant, like our Vein Ripper. But honestly, it's really in here because it targets any number of creatures. If we have Horobi, this is a 5 mana artifact that can tap to destroy every creature we don't control. And the nice thing about this is that the targets have to be chosen before the ability resolves, and so they don't actually gain persist because they will die before the ability resolves to give them persist thanks to Horobi. So this is a very powerful card in this deck because we can use it to save our own things and also destroy our opponent's things. With that being said though, it is also worth noting that Horobi does destroy our creatures as well. So if you have Cauldron of Souls and Horobi, maybe don't target your own things unless you also want to wipe away your own creatures. Moving on to our final key card for today, and this one is Hex Parasite. And Hex Parasite is 1 mana for a 1/1 artifact creature insect. You can pay an X and Phyrexian black to remove up to X counters from target permanent. For each counter removed this way, Hex Parasite gets +1/+0 until the end of turn. Now, the pump ability on it getting the +1/+0, honestly not relevant. Even removing counters is most of the time not going to be relevant. What it is relevant for is the fact that we can make sure that X is 0. So all we have to do is spend either 1 black mana or 2 life to kill any creature on board if Horobi is in play. Because that means we can remove 0 counters from target creature and therefore immediately get rid of it with our commander. So Hex Parasite is very cheap, very efficient, and doesn't even require mana. If we have enough life, we can just spend the 2 life and just kind of keep the game rolling, start hitting our opponents, dealing damage, committing more crimes, and probably running away with the game. That, though, brings us to the end of our key cards section. So the next thing we're going to have to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. And these are cards that synergize really well with each other, but honestly in a lot of cases are just fun cards that I want to highlight. So first up, we have Endbringer and Raven of Fell Omens. Endbringer, one of the best cards in the entire deck, and honestly I debated putting it into the key cards section, but I wanted to highlight this interaction instead. It is 5 and a colorless mana, so you specifically do need a colorless mana to cast it, but other than that, it is a 5/5 Eldrazi that untaps during each other player's untap step, can tap to do 1 damage to any target, pay a colorless and tap, target creature can't attack or block this turn, and 2 colorless and tap, draw a card. Now, while we don't have a ton of colorless mana, since this is really the only thing in the deck that cares about colorless, it's not too hard to come by, but we really want it here for that ability to untap every single turn. That means we can do 1 damage every single turn, which is committing a crime. And the reason that's important is because most of our crime payoffs, like Raven of Fell Omens for example, specify that you can only trigger their abilities once each turn. So Raven of Fell Omens is 1 and a black for a 1/2 bird, it has flying, and whenever you commit a crime, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life, but like I said, that ability only triggers once each turn. With Endbringer, we can trigger that ability every single turn, so if we go around the table in a 4-player game, we can do 1 damage, say, to each opponent, and then 1 to something else, doesn't really matter. And Raven of Fell Omens will trigger 4 total times, making each opponent lose 4 life, while we gain 4 life. Overall, that means that we have done 5 damage to each opponent in just 1 turn cycle, plus we still have this 5/5 that we can hit people with if we need to. We have the 1/2 blocker that can fly, which is also very good. It's triggering the rest of our crime payoffs. It's also possibly killing things if Horobi's in play. So it really just does everything we want it to do and is a great payoff for some of our synergies. Moving on to our second cool interaction. This one is Warlock class and Rush of Dread. So I'm not normally a fan of kind of just killing a single player at the table. That's something I try to avoid. If we're going to take one player out, I want to make sure that it is consistent and can take out multiple players. However, sometimes there is just one player at the table that's got to go. And this is one way to deal with a troublesome player that maybe you couldn't be able to deal with otherwise. And that's because Warlock class is a black mana for an enchantment class. Level 1, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. Levels up to level 2 for 2 mana. When it becomes level 2, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. And level 3, 6 and a black, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. So what that means is if we do 2 damage to an opponent, at the end of our turn, they will take another 2 damage. That's relevant because of Rush of Dread, which is 1 black for a sorcery that has Spree. You can pay 1, target opponent sacrifices half the creatures they control. 2, target opponent discards half the cards in their hand. Or 2, target opponent loses half their life. So if we have an opponent at 40 life, we've leveled Warlock class all the way up, and we cast Rush of Dread for 5 mana. So it'd be 3 and 2 black. Target opponent loses half their life. They go from 40 life to 20 life. Then at the beginning of our end step, since they've lost 20 life, they lose another 20 life, immediately taking them out of the game from their starting life total. Now, admittedly, this is a very expensive combination of cards. Warlock class is 7 mana to get to that last piece. If you're counting the previous mana, that's 10 total mana you have to sink into it. Rush of Dread is 5, and that's if you don't want the other modes. So this is not an easy thing to accomplish, but sometimes you just gotta take a player out. So I did want to highlight that this is something that can do. And so now, before we get to the price of the deck, I do want to take a second to talk about some game changers that we do have in the deck. Well, I say game changers, plural, but it's really just one. In this case, it's Opposition Agent, which is 2 and a black for a 3/2 human rogue. It's got flash. You control your opponents while they're searching their libraries, and while an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast them. So while this is not a crime card in the sense that it commits a literal crime in terms of game mechanics, it kind of commits crimes at the table with the other players because you've got to grab someone's deck, you've got to search through it. It just causes a lot of complications. People don't like their things being stolen. So a little bit of a tricky card to play with. It is very powerful, but it is a little bit of a salty card. So be aware that this is in the deck if you decide to put it together. You'll also notice that it has a massive $21 price tag, so as we move into our price section of the deck, this is also our most expensive card in the deck, and total, the deck came in at $94.20, so you could actually trim it down to about $74 if you wanted to cut out Opposition Agent, but if you don't mind it staying a little bit under the budget and spending quite a bit of the budget on Opposition Agent, then I would recommend keeping it in just because it is a very powerful card in its own right. On the other hand though, if you want to put a card into the deck to increase the price of the deck, I do have a suggestion for you there as well, and this week I would recommend putting in Grim Hireling and taking out Triskelion. So Grim Hireling, 3 and a black for a 3/2 creature, Tiefling Rogue. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create 2 treasure tokens. Then you can pay a black and sacrifice X treasures. Target creature gets -X/-X until the end of turn, but you can only activate it as a sorcery. Now, this doesn't seem that powerful considering we're not a treasure deck, but keep in mind, we can sacrifice 0 treasures to give target creature -0/-0. So this is another card that we can spend a single black to destroy a creature when Horobi's in play, and it gives us the added benefit of getting treasure tokens, so we could actually activate it for a greater number if Horobi's not in play to still kill anything that's getting in the way. However, if you put a card into the deck, then obviously you have to take a card out of the deck, and the card I would take out is Triskelion, which is 6 mana for a 1/1 artifact creature construct that enters with 3 +1/+1 counters, and you can remove a +1/+1 counter to do 1 damage to any target. If we're looking at this in pure just mana value, 6 mana for the Triskelion and removing 3 counters from it can kill 3 creatures with Horobi. The Grim Hireling, while yes it's 4 mana to cast, can do that an infinite number of times. We're not capped out at 3, and it's just the 1 mana. So long term, Grim Hireling is actually going to be much more efficient than Triskelion, plus it comes down earlier and gives us the added benefit of treasures. So I think that pretty much in every way, Grim Hireling just outshines Triskelion in this specific deck. That, though, is the end of our deck tech for today, and before we jump into a game to see how this deck functions, I want to take a second to shout out our current patrons and channel members. So a huge thank you to everyone for supporting the channel. If you are interested in supporting the channel, you can always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That is incredibly helpful. But if you'd like to go a little bit above and beyond, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, or right here on YouTube as a channel member. Now, one last shout out before we move on. In case you have not already, I would highly recommend checking out Labman EDH right here on YouTube. This is being run by Richard, who has shown up a couple of times on this channel. He's a pretty good guy. He does a lot of super cool stuff. I've really enjoyed getting to talk to him about his deck building philosophies and chatting about some of the backstories and the lore in Magic. He's very knowledgeable about this kind of stuff and brings a very unique and creative idea to the deck building process. So do go check out his channel, show him some love. He definitely deserves it. His videos are amazing. He puts a lot of work and time and effort into them. So check him out. That's my only shout out though, other than, of course, our patrons. So with that out of the way, let's jump into a game and see how this deck can function. So this week, we are of course joined by 3 opponents, and they are Doodle, playing Ich-Tekik Salvage Splicer and Ravo Soultender, Cole, playing Ureni of the Unwritten, and Bilal, playing Rashmi and Ragavan. So starting off with Doodle and the Ich-Tekik Ravos deck, this is actually, I believe, a modified, or at least slightly modified, version of our Abzan Golem deck that we did on this channel quite a while ago. I'll try to make sure that the link is somewhere in the description or right here on screen. But this is a Golem deck, so it wants to use Ich-Tekik to make Golems, and then it also kind of cares about the graveyard, which is where Ravos comes in, being able to get creatures back from the graveyard and also put it in the right colors. So a very sweet deck, and I'm very happy to see one of the decks that I built getting used by someone else, because that lets me know that even if it's a little bit janky, it's probably at least still fun enough to put together. Moving on to Cole and his Ureni deck. This is exactly what it looks like. This is a dragon deck, so I fully expect him to have just massive creatures that are going to start coming down and beating face and sneaking other dragons into play and doing a ton of damage. And I think that if we can get Horobi in play, I think we can probably handle the dragons pretty well. However, if we're just committing crimes and our commander is dealt with, then I don't know if we have any great answers to the dragon. So I think it's very important for our deck that we keep Horobi in play specifically for Ureni. And then, last but not least, we have Bilal playing Rashmi and Ragavan. So he specifically wants to cast spells and then kind of cascade, even though it's not the cascade mechanic, into his opponent's decks. So the first spell he casts each turn allows him to steal the top card of an opponent's deck, and then he can cast it for free if it's less than or equal to the number of artifacts he controls. So he's kind of a weird synergy between artifacts, tokens, and also theft, which is in the teamer colors. So it's a very cool blend of ideas and things that Bilal can do that I imagine will put him in a huge lead over his opponents in terms of value. So I think that if I have to pick a deck I'm the most concerned about, it's honestly probably Rashmi and Ragavan, simply because I don't know what to expect, and the fact that he's able to play all of his opponent's spells means that he can probably get the best of everyone's deck. Anyway though, those are all of our opponents, so let me know down in the comments if there's any deck you think is going to walk out the winner. Make sure you get those predictions in, and then other than that, if you haven't already, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, but let's jump into this game and I will see you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I go first, followed by Doodle, Cole, and then Bilal. On my first turn, I play a Swamp, cast a Soul Ring, and use that to cast Mind Stone. Doodle plays a Path of Ancestry. Cole plays a Command Tower. Bilal plays a Tree of Tales. I play a Swamp and cast Gisa the Hellraiser, giving zombies and skeletons I control +1/+1 and Menace, and letting me make 2 tapped 2/2 zombie rogue tokens once per turn when I commit a crime. Doodle plays a Vault of Whispers and casts Rampant Growth, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Cole plays a Flooded Grove. Bilal plays a Mountain and casts Curse of Opulence, enchanting Doodle, so whenever a player attacks Doodle, both Bilal and the attacking player create a gold token. On my turn, I play a Bojuka Bog, exiling Doodle's graveyard and creating 2 zombie tokens since I committed a crime. After that, I attack Doodle for 4 with Gisa, letting Bilal and I both make a gold token. Then, in my second main phase, I immediately spend the gold token to cast Endbringer, which untaps on each player's untap step, can tap to do 1 damage to any target, tap for 1 mana to prevent a creature from attacking or blocking this turn, and tap for 2 mana to draw a card. Doodle plays a Temple of Malady, scrying 1 and casts Golem Foundry, putting a charge counter on it whenever he casts an artifact spell, and letting him remove 3 charge counters to make a 3/3 Golem. Cole plays a Karplusan Forest and casts Guided Passage, letting Bilal search Cole's library for a land, creature and non-creature non-land, revealing them and putting them into Cole's hand. This results in Bilal choosing to give Cole Sarkhan Soul of Flame, Exotic Orchard, and Soul Ring. On Bilal's turn, he plays an island, casts an Izzet Signet, then also cast Bitterthorn Nissa's Animus, creating a 0/0 Germ token, equipping it with Bitterthorn, giving it +1/+1, and letting Bilal search his library for a basic land when it attacks, putting it into play tapped. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Bilal for 4 with Gisa, and also attacking Doodle and Cole, each for 3 with a zombie, making another gold for myself and Bilal. Bilal blocks with his Germ, taking no damage, while Doodle and Cole both take 3. Then, in my second main phase, I tap the Endbringer to do 1 damage to Bilal, making 2 more zombies. After that, I cast Dread Presence, now letting me draw a card and lose a life, or do 2 damage to any target and gain 2 life whenever a swamp enters under my control. Once that resolves, I play a swamp to draw a card and lose a life. Doodle plays a Plains and casts Basalt Golem, which can't be blocked by artifact creatures, destroys any creature that blocks it, and replaces that creature with a 0/2 Stone token with Defender. This also puts a charge counter on the Golem Foundry. Then at the end of turn, I use Endbringer to do 1 damage to Bilal, making 2 more zombie tokens. Cole plays an Exotic Orchard, casts his own Soul Ring, and then also casts Frontier Siege, naming cons when it enters, so he makes 2 green mana at the beginning of each of his main phases. Then at the end of Cole's turn, I once again tap Endbringer to do another damage to Bilal and create 2 more zombie tokens. Bilal plays an island and casts Gimbal Gremlin Prodigy, giving artifact creatures he controls trample, and at the beginning of his end step, creating a 0/0 Gremlin artifact token, then putting X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of differently named artifact tokens he controls. This turn, he makes a 2/2 Gremlin token, and at the end of turn, I tap Endbringer to do 1 more damage to Bilal, and make yet 2 more zombie tokens. On my turn, I play a swamp, drawing a card and losing a life, then move to combat, attacking each of my opponents for 9 damage with 3 zombie tokens, making myself and Bilal another gold. Doodle blocks with his Golem and Bilal blocks with his Gremlin, killing it, and notably the zombies should have had Menace thanks to Gisa, but we don't catch that at the time. In my second main phase, I cast Liliana the Last Hope, immediately activating her +1 ability to give Gimbal -2/-1 until my next turn, creating 2 more zombie tokens, and at the end of turn, I tap Endbringer to do 1 damage to Bilal. Doodle plays an Exotic Orchard and passes, but once again, at the end of turn, I tap Endbringer, doing 1 damage to Bilal and making 2 more zombie tokens. Cole makes 2 green mana in his first main phase, plays a Yavimaya Coast, and casts his commander, Ureni of the Unwritten, looking at the top 8 cards of his library whenever it enters or attacks, putting a dragon creature from among them onto the battlefield. With this trigger, he puts Scourge of the Throne into play, which has Dethrone, and whenever it attacks for the first time each turn, if it's attacking the player with the highest life total, Cole untaps all his creatures and gets an additional combat phase. In his second main phase, he gets 2 more green mana, casting Garruk's Uprising, drawing a card when it enters since he controls a creature with power 4 or greater, giving his creatures trample and letting him draw a card when a creature power 4 or greater enters under his control. At the end of turn, I tap Endbringer to do 1 damage to Bilal and make 2 more zombies. Bilal plays a forest and casts his commander Rashmi and Ragavan. Once that resolves, he equips Gimbal with Bitterthorn and attacks Doodle with him for 5, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped, and making both himself and I a gold token. Then, at the end of turn, Bilal makes a 3/3 Gremlin token, and I use Endbringer, doing 1 damage to Cole and making 2 zombies. On my turn, I play a Swamp, drawing a card and losing a life. Then I attack each opponent for 18 total damage with 6 zombies apiece, making Bilal and myself a gold token. Before damage though, Doodle reluctantly casts Settle the Wreckage, exiling all attacking creatures but letting me search my library for 18 basic lands, since there were 18 attacking creatures, putting them all into play tapped. Each swamp triggers Dread Presence, so I also wind up making 2 zombies, drawing 3 cards, losing 3 life, gaining 30 life, doing 4 damage to Cole and doing 26 damage to Bilal, putting him down to only 1 life. In my second main phase, I cast Bloodthirsty Blade and attach it to Ureni, giving it +2/+0 and goading it. I also activate Liliana's +1 ability, giving Gimbal -2/-1 until my next turn, and tap Endbringer to do 1 damage to Cole. On Doodle's turn, he cast a Tempered Steel, giving his artifact creatures +2/+2, then also cast Mere Retriever, putting a charge counter on Golem Foundry. At the end of turn, I tap Endbringer, doing 1 damage to Cole and making 2 more zombie tokens. In Cole's first main phase, he takes 2 green mana and uses it to cast Beast Within, destroying my Bloodthirsty Blade and giving me a 3/3 Beast token instead. This lets him attack me with Ureni and Scourge of the Throne, putting a counter on the Scourge and hitting me for 13 total damage, untapping his creatures, getting an extra combat step, and putting Dragonlord Atarka into play from the top of his library, drawing a card and doing 5 damage to Gisa when it enters, killing her. In response, I tap Endbringer to do 1 damage to Bilal, knocking him out of the game so I can make 2 last zombie tokens. For his second combat, Cole again attacks me with Ureni and the Scourge, putting a counter on the Scourge, hitting me for 14 damage, and putting Gadrak the Crown Scourge into play, drawing a card and making a treasure token in his end step for each creature that died during his turn. In his second main phase, Cole cast Will of the Teamer, creating a 4/4 token copy of Sol Ring, drawing a card, and also drawing 7 cards since he controls a creature with 7 power. He then plays an island, and at the end of turn, I flash in Opposition Agent, now letting me control an opponent whenever they search their libraries, and I get the card that they search for. On my turn, I cast my commander, Horobi Death's Wail, now destroying any creature that becomes the target of a spell or ability. This lets me activate Liliana's +1 ability, giving Cole's Scourge of the Throne -2/-1, destroying it with Horobi. After that, I cast Hex Parasite, which lets me pay X and a Phyrexian black mana to remove X counters from target permanent. With Horobi, this essentially allows me to pay a single black mana to target a creature and destroy it. With that, I pay 6 mana to destroy Cole's remaining 4 creatures and both of Doodle's, clearing the way for me to attack Doodle for 7 and attack Cole for exactly 19 damage, knocking him out of the game. On Doodle's turn, all he can do is cast his commander, Ravo Soultender, but unfortunately for him, I'm able to use Hex Parasite and Horobi to kill it, simply attacking him on my turn for 26 total damage, knocking him out, and winning me the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. The turn 1 Sol Ring for us really took us off to a tremendously fast start. Getting Gisa into play as early as we did meant that we could just kind of steamroll the rest of the table. We were able to make a ton of zombie tokens, and by the time that the zombies were dealt with, there was nothing our opponents could really do to stop us, and it didn't help that Doodle was almost forced into casting Settle the Wreckage to stop us from killing him, which then put just about every land in our deck into play, and with the Dread Presence did a ton of damage and drew us a bunch of cards. So it was just kind of like a perfect storm of things going right for our deck and things going wrong for our opponents. So definitely very powerful, and this game in particular showed me just how good Gisa really is. That is a absolutely broken card if you can build around it properly. But anyway, our opponents as well also did some pretty sweet things. Doodle unfortunately could not get off the ground with his golems. He was kind of stuck playing one creature a turn that was a lot of times either forced to block or forced into a situation where he couldn't put the pressure on his opponents like he really wanted to. And I think that if the game went late, he would probably get a little bit more of that value, but this just wasn't the game for it. The Ureni deck from Cole, very powerful, and we talked a little bit at the time that when he hit Dragonlord Atarka, if he had actually hit Atarka World Render, it would have ended the game because it would have given all of his dragons double strike, and I would have just died to commander damage. But the fact that he had essentially not much going on until Ureni hit the board, and then he put himself in a position where he was probably going to win if he untapped again, was very impressive from Ureni. I kind of underestimated the ETB and attack trigger on his commander. I guess in some way I thought it had put the dragon into his hand, not into play, so being able to see it do those things was very, very cool. And then last but not least, we have Bilal, focusing in on kind of artifact tokens, treasures, clues, gold, that kind of thing. I think was a very cool idea for Rashmi and Ragavan. Being able to flood the board with kind of some mini artifact tokens was very, very cool, and being able to use that as a way to hopefully steal things from his opponents, I think was a lot of fun. He just didn't quite get his engines rolling because, just like Doodle, he was kind of forced into blocking some things. He was forced to get rid of some creatures when he didn't really want to. But overall, I think the deck, our deck specifically, played very well. I think that the game was a ton of fun. Let me know down in the comments if there's anything you think we should add to this deck or even take away. I love hearing people's opinions about the decks. But overall, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. But with all that being said, thank you again, and I will see you on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.